Hello, everybody. My name is Alex Schiller of Schiller Digital Media, and today I have with me Vice Mayor Adam Shimoni, a champion not only for the individual, but for the community of Flagstaff. Adam, how are you doing today? Audio.
Back.
Oh, he's back. There it is. He missed my intro, but that's okay. Welcome to the show, Adam.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So,
Thanks for having me.
oh, no worries. So today's little podcast, little blurb is going to be mostly about like the main three topics that a lot of Americans have, a lot of Flagstaff residents have as well, is the importance of voting. And I know that register for voting closed yesterday or today?
Yesterday.
Yeah, yesterday. So a bunch of Arizonans hopefully have registered to vote and have placed their early ballots if they receive those. And then obviously the pandemic and the upcoming election. So just some major questions. I know we have a little bit of a short time here. So one of the main things that a lot of people in my generation tend to face is, does your vote count? And you're a champion of answering this question. You answer it all the time on social media and stuff like that. So I want to give you the floor on that one.
Thank you for that question, Alex. Your vote definitely counts, and you know, your vote counts furthest and most at the local level. You know, too often do we speak about politics that are way above and beyond us at the local level. And not to take away the importance of voting at the state and national level, but right now at the local level, we really do need you to engage and be a part of the system and part of our local government. And so, having run and lost by 59 votes myself in 2016, I can tell you firsthand it definitely counts at the local level, and locally we're doing so much in terms of climate change, sustainability, policing, budgeting, housing, helping our unsheltered populations. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, and there's great people running for office that at times fall short by just a handful of votes. And so getting involved at the local level is really important. And I think that this year I've seen more people engaged in talking about local politics that I just haven't seen that in the past, and it's very exciting.
I think that's totally true, and I think having already submitted my ballot today, we had a bunch of great candidates, and I think one of the main things that a lot of people face when deciding candidates that they might not have heard of or didn't have as good of like a social media outreach, etc., which I think is where most politics and most politicians are trying to set their stages, is on social media. How do you research candidates for your own personal ideas and finding reliable sources of information to determine what you need to know about this candidate? I know that was one of the things that I faced with a bunch of candidates, because you can always go to their website and get kind of their generalistic view of what their platform's about, but that's coming from them. So how do you find unbiased, unfiltered information for local government?
It's tough, right? It's definitely not an easy thing, and it's something I've been working towards addressing for many years, and basically you got to just do your best to do the research you can, watch the debates, go to the websites, do the reading that you can, look at the Daily Sun articles that have been coming out weekly on the council candidate responses, and but also take time to talk to other people who are in the scene, people that you trust, people who you think that their points are valid or their opinions are important to you. And so, because there's just so much that goes into making a council body the most successful it can be. Speaking about local politics, we have a city manager form of government. So the city manager oversees our government and is the most important person, and it has the most power in the city. And a lot of people don't even know that. And then the mayor, just like any other council member, has one vote, and that's the way it is. And we work off of a majority. So when 4 members of council agree on something, that is the direction. Doesn't matter what the mayor thinks. So understanding the dynamics on council currently and dynamics of what the future council might look like. And so you have to take into a few things into account. The city manager and the direction of the city, which I would argue is very good right now. We're heading in a great direction, in my opinion.
I would agree.
You look at the council majority, and being someone who's progressive, I feel very comfortable looking both, presently and then also into the future at the council, and feeling that the council majority reflects my values as a progressive. Mm-hmm. So, every candidate for council in this upcoming race is a progressive, I would argue, to a degree. and that's shocking, and
Mm-hmm.
that's very different than it was a few years ago. So that to me is a positive and also a negative. It's the positive because we have good representation and there's just a bunch of progressive people coming into office, which is just dominating the scene. But then the negative is, what whose voices are we missing?
Mm-hmm.
Where's the balance? Do we have balance? And what do we need, out of the mayor seat? Because the
Mm-hmm.
mayor seat is the other piece of the equation. If every candidate for council is progressive, then you look at the mayor seat, which there's two candidates for. And I've personally endorsed Charlie Odegaard,
Mm-hmm.
who is a registered Republican, and I've gotten a lot of pushback from that
Mm-hmm.
endorsement. And we can dive into that if you'd like to. But basically, the role of mayor is kind of like, if you look at government like a nonprofit, you have
Mm-hmm.
a board of directors or a board member group, and then you have the chair of the board, and they then tell the executive director, they help guide the executive director's role and their job as at
Mm-hmm.
the nonprofit. So the council's like a board, like a
Mm-hmm.
nonprofit board, and the mayor is like the chair of the board, and they
Mm-hmm.
kind of help make everything go along.
Yeah.
And I just think it's so important that we recognize the importance of that chair's position
Mm-hmm.
and role in moving council forward, regardless of their own politics.
Yeah.
Their job is to make sure we are moving forward as a body and
Mm-hmm.
collectively. And so thinking about the board analogy with a nonprofit, do you want someone that has no experience in the board
Mm-hmm.
coming in, and then not just coming into the board as a voting member, but leading it?
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's very concerning. And so Charlie has that experience of being a part of the board, and I've seen him work time and time again, whether it's when he's in the majority or in the minority, understanding that he is part of a larger team, regardless of his own politics.
I think a big thing out of there too is a lot of people, especially now, there's a lot of settle for Biden. There's a lot of Democrats who are disappointed in the last two candidates that we've had for president, and disappointed with Democrats in general, in how they've handled national and local politics. And so how do you, especially in your view as running as an independent, how do you talk to those people who don't necessarily find themselves on one conservative side or one liberal side, and find themselves more in the middle? How do you talk to those kind of people and express what candidate would go where when they're registered Republican or they're registered Democrat?
Right. And just to be clear, I am registered as a Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
I did begin running in 2018 as an independent because I was so frustrated with the Democratic Party.
Mm-hmm.
Corruption doesn't see party lines, it doesn't see borders. Corruption sees power and it goes right for it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And there's corruption on all sides, doesn't matter what party you're a part of. And I've always thought we're above party politics as individuals and
Mm-hmm.
as a community and as a people. And as much as they might want to pin us against each other, we're really above that. So I think more and more people are moving towards that middle,
Mm-hmm.
and are just saying, I don't like what's going on either side.
Yeah.
And so remind me your question.
So it was just, how do you talk to those people who find themselves in the middle when struggling with, they don't like Trump or they don't like Biden or any other conservative liberal, not agreeing with either side, just kind of finding a middle ground to either. A lot of people have been saying that they don't like the idea of like a third party because they feel like they're throwing away their vote back to does your vote count question. And so I feel like a lot of people get scared of the third party but don't like either of the two main parties. And so I shouldn't say main parties, but the two dominant parties.
Right.
What would you tell that person, whether you're voting A, B, or C?
I'd tell them, look at I'd ask them, what are your values? What do you care about?
Mm-hmm.
Is it sustainability? Is it alternative transportation? Is it, justice and climate justice? Is it, social justice and equality? And then look at the candidates and also look at the bigger picture. What direction is the government currently heading in? And then who is it that you want to enter the game into the, think of it like a team. We're a team competing in a sport.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing we're competing for is to better our values in the political arena.
Mm-hmm.
And so who do you want to add to the team that is not just going to bring a skill set to the field, but can collaborate and work with these folks. Because at the end of the day, we're all humans, and we need to work together, and we do work together. But we need people who can, build consensus and not burn bridges. We don't need any more bridges being burnt. That's honestly not going to be to our benefit in the end. Yeah. I know sometimes it's easy just to say burn it down, start over. Let's just do that. But the truth is that can also harm us and set us back, especially if we're on a good path. And so, right now, I would argue that at the city in Flagstaff, we're on a great path. We're working towards priority-based budgeting, which totally redoes the way we do our budgets, realigning our values to our money, or our money to our values. And that's huge in creating more transparency and accountability. We're addressing policing and policing alternatives. We recently declared a climate emergency, moving us to net neutrality as our goal by 2030, which is extremely ambitious. We're talking about social justice issues like Real to Flag Project, bringing the whole Southside neighborhood out of the floodplain, which has been brought upon them because the north side of the tracks didn't want to deal with a floodplain over their property. So they diverted that floodplain to the south side a long time ago. And so we're finally dealing with that now. Talk about making this town more inclusive to indigenous populations and people of color. And just so much more, right? There's just so many different things we're working towards that I'm very proud of. And so we need to keep this momentum going on, because at the local level, we're losing Coral Evans, our mayor. She's running for legislature, so she's gone. A huge pillar that, whether or not you agree with her, every time she brings a lot of historical understanding and information to the table, so that we are most effective with what we're doing now. We're losing Jamie Whelan, who got knocked down the primary in the mayoral race. Jim McCarthy is running for council again, who I've endorsed. And then you have Charlie Odegaard. So potentially, if none of those people get reelected or elected, you're left with myself, Councilmember Austin Aslan, and Regina Salas. And that's the body that brings the historical knowledge forward. And that's 2 years of historical understanding, which is a lot, but just nothing compared to Coral, who has 12 years under her belt. He's a third generation resident, right? So there's potential for a lot of change in this upcoming election. And change is good, but it also comes with a price tag in terms of the momentum that we already have in place today.
Butting heads for 1 year could change the dynamic of the 4 years that you have in office. I think I lost you again. Uh-oh.
Alex?
There he is. All right. We're back.
Yeah. Anyways, yeah.
So, you were talking about historical significance at the local government level and community involvement and being a member of the community, which Coral Evans, I agree, was totally one of those people. Where's the balance of that, right? Because you have to have like newer, fresher faces that bring in ideas that maybe the consensus council won't necessarily have, or to adjust the consensus that the council already has, rather. And so when you see, like yourself, coming in as a business owner, as an advocate in the community for not only the population of Flagstaff, but the students who are here for 75% of the year, who don't feel like they have a voice, and especially not only in NAU politics, but in the local politics as well. And so how do you kind of balance community representation, community like ideals and values, and moving forward from historical ideas?
Yeah, that's a good question, because, it's one thing to have the end goal in mind. It's another thing to have the end goal in mind and also have the current reality in mind, and knowing how the direction we're currently heading in, and then how to adjust that direction to where you want it and take us to where you want us to go. That's where the hard work really lies.
That connection really, really attacking us at the end of this interview here. All right. We're back. Take two. I think it's possible. I think we got it.
Into a juicy topic too. I really like that.
Which one?
We left off on. I'd like to take it back up there if we can.
That was.
How do you take where the community wants us to change and be, and like how do you take the current government and current efforts to where you want it to be?
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, honestly, just go for it.
Yeah,
I'm already
yeah,
recording, so
please.
you're all set.
So I was talking about, like the idea of like policing and how do
Mhm.
you take a model of which has been in place for many years and is very comfortable for many in the positions of power that exist and change that because there's public demand and cultural demand for that change.
Mhm.
How do you do that? I think we've seen some communities around the nation rip the band-aid off and just do it and do it in a very dramatic way,
Mhm.
very political to an extent. And there's pros and cons, right, to doing it in each of the different ways. And so that's one approach. But I think in Flagstaff, well, I know in Flagstaff, our approach is a little bit different. Our approach is going to be more thoughtful. It's going to take longer, but it's going to be collective. And it's going to bring all the different people to the table and bring us forward together. Because, I think a lot of folks are, pushing for this big defund the police movement,
Mhm.
et cetera, et cetera. And that's tough because it's divisive language and
Yeah.
it brings walls up in people when that topic is brought up.
I
So
feel
go ahead.
I feel like there's a communication issue, not necessarily in local government particularly, but the way that politics is handled in mass media, the 24-hour news cycle, by the national government especially. Just communication is a real issue.
Yep.
And I feel like the way that we word things, and I give credit to defund the police, because if you look at the actual like movement, the call for different change socially, I think there's a lot of good things that we can learn from there. But the language of defund the police
Right.
attacks more than offers suggestion. And so I feel like that causes a lot of problems with people, and they don't understand the concepts that I don't want to call it a revolution, but the change is presenting.
Right. And Alex, you and I both being white privileged males,
Mhm.
it's easy for us to say these things,
Yeah.
right? Because for some, they've lost trust. They've really lost that credibility for government and policing. And so for them, they're like, yeah, screw it, defund them, burn it down, kind of like what we were saying earlier, right?
Mhm.
But I think ultimately, from my perspective, in my seat, in the work we're doing at the city, I want to bring everyone together and walk over that bridge together.
Mhm.
Again, are we building consensus or are we burning bridges? And ultimately, to be most successful, we don't want anyone dragging their heels,
Yeah.
right? We want people walking arm in arm forward, wearing masks, 6 feet apart.
That would be helpful.
But in all seriousness, I've been working very closely with our police chief on
Mhm.
all these alternatives. And the police play a role in this.
Mhm.
Are they the front and center, like some people like to make it out to be? I'd say no. The
Mhm.
police have a small role
Mhm.
in the bigger topic of well-being of our community, the well-being
Correct.
of our community. Like you mentioned, with the defund movement, what are they advocating for? Housing, wraparound services,
Mhm.
job training, just the needs of our basic community's well-being.
Mhm.
And that is something that I am also working towards and advocating for, and we're doing it at the local level. It's great, and we've got great community partners in the community currently doing these things all the time, but they
Mhm.
need our help as a city to really kind of bring us all together and move us forward united, because it's a huge lift.
Yeah.
But we have the opportunity to be the example in the state
Mhm.
and then be an example across the nation. And
Mhm.
I have no doubt in a year from now, our hard work and labor that we're putting in today will result in a way that really makes national news.
Mhm.
I really believe that.
How I'm very curious. So, do you think America is too big? A lot of people that I've been talking to recently are. I know one of the things that I've kind of thought of from my own ideology as a human is looking at the EU and how they function, and how the EU is essentially their form of Europe's form of national government, right? And how we have 50 different states with 50 different ideologies and hundreds of ideologies within those 50 states. How would you foresee us pushing something from a local level in Arizona to maybe a state level in Arizona, and then making it influential national policy?
Well, the beautiful thing is we're all connected with our phones and
Mm-hmm.
social media and just just technology, really.
Mhm.
And so, right now, models such as Cahoots, for example, talking
Mhm.
about policing again. Cahoots is out of Eugene, Oregon, and they have this alternative response to 911 calls.
Mhm.
They're getting national attention, and they're getting calls from all over the nation saying, "We want to do what you have in our towns." And so the ability to get trendy and get hot and
Mhm.
get recognized across the nation can happen overnight. And suddenly a small model in a small town can become a national standard. And that's just the beauty of our current reality, especially in
Mhm.
America, where we kind of can share ideas with, we can't, we're not just gonna be like, oh, that happened in Switzerland, or
Mhm.
that's going on in New Zealand, that's different. But when you say, no, that's happening in our state, or
Mhm.
happening in another state in America, then it's like, okay, we're playing in the same playing field, we're on the same level field, so to speak. So it's easier to kind of copy and paste different styles across,
Across
it's kind of like,
across state lines
and
and
it all
communities.
boils down to um, cultural movements and what's the word I'm looking for? Like things that are popular, like
Mhm.
you know,
Pop culture.
yeah, yeah, but I'd say even more than pop culture, like we wouldn't be talking about policing. Our police chief might not be as willing to talk about these big changes if it wasn't for the culture shift and demand that's
For
currently
it.
happening.
Hmm.
And demand's not a good term, but it is the reality.
Yeah.
Whether we call it demand or not, people are ready for change and they want to
Yeah.
see it. So it's like either you get with it or you get out,
Hmm. And
And
I think that's a way that a lot of people are kind of turning their vote this year is either you cement yourself where you're at and we vote you out, or you are able to adjust and we can see change in your policy and your vote and we move
yep,
forward with you, or we
yep.
find somebody who will replace you. And
And
so I think that's where the power of the vote comes in. I think that's another discussion that people need to think about when they're choosing candidates rather, and researching them and doing that stuff that we talked about earlier. Did you have like a follow up to that?
I did. I just wanted to say, and someone sent me a voter guide that we had put together at Friends of Flagstaff's Future, a local nonprofit, back in 2016. And council member Charlie Odegaard was a candidate back then.
Mm-hmm.
And all these questions about, sustainability, minimum wage, this and that. Charlie was like a no, 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 no. And it was very obvious that he wasn't like a progressive candidate.
Mm-hmm.
But since then he's been elected for 4 years,
Mm-hmm.
and I looked at all those points. Someone had emailed this to me, and I addressed each of those points, and I was like, we're going to have the highest minimum wage in a year from now.
Mm-hmm.
We passed a climate emergency declaration and the climate action and adaptation plan within the last year.
Mm-hmm.
And Charlie was a part of that.
Mm-hmm.
We're addressing policing. It's like all these progressive topics Charlie Odegaard has been an advocate for. And maybe, he came out against minimum wage.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, we're still moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
So again, you got to also think of the big picture in terms of the team mentality, at least at the local level, right?
Yeah.
We work as a body, as a majority, and it is in tandem with city manager and the city government at large.
Mm-hmm.
And so even if someone doesn't necessarily agree with what you're saying today, how will they work within the whole?
Mm-hmm.
And are they going to do everything they can to fight it down, or are they going to get with the program and help it move forward?
I think a lot of people in this generation, or at least in my generation coming up, are very focused on local government. I also had the blessing of going to NAU, where you did a lot of outreach. You and a lot of candidates did a lot of outreach to us, specifically as students, to make our voices heard. And I feel like that's a move that a lot of politicians are using as our generation steps into the main voting force. And one of the things that I feel like needs to be talked about is how we take that local mentality of a team group, like you're saying with the city council, as a community effort and put that on a national scale. Because I feel like right now, the national government is the least connected to the American public like it was before 9/11. I think 9/11 was a moment that brought us together in unity as an American culture, and politics used that to its advantage to shape an American narrative, good or bad, depending on how you see it. And I think we're starting to completely lose that again. I think it started at the 2016 election, and it's become this massive tidal wave of lack of connection to anything that's going on in national politics. So how do we take that mentality of community, of a team effort, and place that at our highest level of government?
Well, I'd say it starts locally, right? Again, it all comes back to local, and it comes back to like the way each of us handles our own individual lives and the relationships that we have. How do we handle controversy in our own lives, or when we butt heads with somebody or disagree on social media, for example, or in face-to-face conversation? And it comes back to that level. But bringing it to the government level, at the local level, we have so much work to do here in Flagstaff to make this an inclusive, welcoming community for all people. Specifically thinking about our indigenous populations and our Black community in Flagstaff. Quite frankly, Louis the lumberjack should be African American. I really believe that, and I look forward to the day that we make that a reality, because this is a white person culture. And if you look at all the people in power, both elected and as city staff, for example, or in any of the government positions, for the most part, they're a bunch of white people. And that's not reflective of the community. So we need to better reflect the diversity of our community, both in opinions and in background, because at the end of the day, we have unconscious bias, regardless of how much training we might receive. You still have that, and that's just the fact. So I think to answer your question, how do we impact the national level, is by impacting the local level and doing it the best we can locally. And just knowing if we're striving for excellence at the local level, that message will radiate above and beyond any one person or any of us.
I think it would also, I think if we establish a culture at the state level, not even like local, like city level, but like at the state level, it would force us to think about our representatives in Congress, both Senate and House of Representatives, and enable our communities to vote in members to the national government that reflect our ideals as Arizonans and as community members. And so I think that's like where the big thing is. That's why I focus so heavily on Mark Kelly and Martha McSally's like senatorial debate, because that's like that is the influential if it's both, either it's split Republican Democrat or it's going to be Democrat. And that would completely flip the mindset of a state that has been very historically red. So it's one of those things that this is a turning point for Arizona.
Yep. And I always like to use this analogy. You can't run before you can learn to walk. Like until we fix the local issue, we can't fix the state issue or the regional and then the state. And yes, we can work at all of them at the same time. But in the end, if we don't have a local government that is excellent and doing all the things it needs to be doing to best reflect the needs of the community, we're missing something. It's like you're training on an injured ankle. You got to take care of your injury first, and then you can take slow steps to truly be sustainable and truly do it right.
Practice like you play, and then preparation is key.
And just like with efforts like Tai Chi and any kind of like Qigong, movements that are slow. You can't move fast. If you want to move fast in perfection, you got to practice it slow, right? And so same kind of awareness, but brought to the local level.
Yeah, I would agree completely. Speaking of local levels and things that we have to fix, there's a pandemic going on, which is why this is a very virtual conversation. What has been in Flagstaff locally the biggest problem that you guys have had to face and immediately change when this pandemic started and throughout the pandemic?
So Mayor Evans was the first mayor in the state to take action out of her own ability as mayor to declare an emergency. And I'm very proud of what she has done for us in the city of Flagstaff. But quite immediately, right after she did that, the governor took action a couple of days after that and declared his own emergency statewide. And in his emergency declaration, stripped all local municipalities of our power. So we've been battling with the governor since this began for local control to protect our community. There's a difference in philosophy about regulation and what government should do and should not do. And people, view mask wearing as one of their freedoms.
Yeah.
So we've been fighting uphill this whole time to just simply protect our neighbors in our community and our neighbors to the north, right? The reservation's gotten hit very hard by this, and we've lost about 140 people in our county, and it's devastating.
Yeah.
As you know, people are in hospitals and they can't see visitors, and they can't have loved ones come and be there with them their last days at times.
Yeah.
It's horrendous. And so we've been struggling just to not have to be playing these political games and doing what's right for the community. The governor finally let us issue a mask mandate at the local level. He finally said, okay, you cities do what you want. I'm not going to take action, but if you want to, go ahead. And we are, right? But it hasn't been easy.
Yeah.
We don't have control over everything, but
what do you see is the biggest problem with that ordinance? As somebody who works in the food service industry, as my primary occupation, I encounter a lot of people who, like you said, see their masks as a freedom, as a right, as a choice. And it's hard because working for a private organization, I have to follow certain regulations that they put in place. And if they say the words medical exemption, I can't say anything to them. Right. But if they don't say anything like that, I have the right to ask them to leave and kick them out of my store. But it's one of those things that where does a private sector and local government work with each other to enable? Because it's a huge thing in local business right now, that you can just kick somebody out of your store. You don't have to worry about any corporate organization, but with other private organizations, how do you tell those private organizations that it has to be a certain way?
So we've encountered quite a few local businesses and efforts that have not been in compliance, and we've sent a police officer to go speak with them and remind them of the mask mandates and remind them that we are in a pandemic. Unfortunately, we've made COVID political. And it's really unfortunate because I can't stand political games and politics in general. I really can't, especially when it comes to public health. And, I think finally the White House and other, unfortunately, it tends to be Republican leadership is starting to wake up to the reality of the CDC guidelines not just being a food for thought recommendation list, but a reality for keeping people safe, and that anyone that goes through COVID will tell you it's not a pleasant experience, and especially when they're above a certain age. But we're doing our best to communicate with local businesses and empowering them to do what's right for the community's health and well-being, and leading by example, and also saying, hey, you can blame us. Say this is the government's fault. They're requiring it. It's a mandate, and then through requiring employees like you to do it, and then hoping that the, a customer base is respectful of that too. But in Arizona, we have one of the highest anti-mask populations as a state across the nation here in Arizona. So
it showed in our spike.
We're up against a lot in overcoming this, and it's going to be unfortunate. It's going to be painful, as it already has been. And again, it's been politicized, and it seems like until it happens to you directly or someone a lot of times folks won't actually,
change their
do
idea.
what they need to do, right?
So what recommendations have you been using? We talk a lot. We hear a lot about the CDC in the news. We hear a lot about Fauci in the news. What recommendations have you been taking, or rather, what science have you been taking from the CDC and other organizations and using to kind of influence policy that you guys are pushing at the local level? I know the CDC is a super big one, but are there any other organizations that we should keep our eye on to help these places?
I'm more just, following the CDC guidelines. I think it's very basic and straightforward. Wear a mask, social distance, wash your hands, stay home if you're feeling sick, get tested, and and just having that awareness of well-being and taking care of your community and taking care of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, things like don't go to a crowded venue, don't go to a bar, don't put yourself in a risky situation. It's like gambling. You're
Mm-hmm.
taking a chance every time you do something. And I'm proud to say that I think a lot in our community are, I'd say the majority are very much in line and respecting
Mm-hmm.
the reality of what needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And it's becoming more and more culturally normal and
Yeah.
and expected.
Yeah.
But younger populations like your generation and those in school and high school and middle school, they might struggle with this. Their
Mm-hmm.
parents and their people older than them struggle with this. So of
Mm-hmm.
course they're going to struggle with this too. And they're wanting to be kids. They want to be young people. They
Yeah.
want to play sports. They want to socialize. They
Mm-hmm.
want to party, and and they might also not be as negatively impacted by COVID, to our understanding at
Mm-hmm.
least. And so, to understand your role in a larger community at a young age is difficult,
Mm-hmm.
and to have that kind of compassion and awareness for that larger community is challenging at times. But
Mm-hmm.
that's what we're asking people to do, is have that compassion and empathy for your larger community.
Yeah, I've definitely seen it, again, working in the food service industry, seeing parents wearing masks and their children not, and I can very much tell that it's one of those, that parent's having a rough day. They tried to force a mask on that kid, and that kid is just vehemently upset about it. So it's definitely a rough thing that we have to go through as a community, as a nation, as a world. I mean, this is a worldwide pandemic. I feel like I think the biggest issue with the pandemic as a whole has been not specifically the White House's response, but the communication in our nation specifically. We account for, if I remember correctly, the stat is like 20 to 25% of the world's deaths, and we're 5% of the world's population, and it's kind of ridiculous. It's one of those things that we have so many ideas as an American population that we're allowed to think freely. We're allowed to have our own ideas. We're allowed to communicate our opinions. And you're right, we're politicizing a pandemic that is really it's a worldwide health issue. It's not a idea that you can vote yay or nay on and just make disappear.
Are you on this side or that side? Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
It's an awful reality that a lot of people are dealing with, and politics is taking advantage of it. And I think it's a dangerous form of communication for the nation.
And Alex, you talked earlier about, your generation being more in that voting base majority and elected officials and people you see tailoring to your population more often in your demographic and your generation. And my call to action for your followers and those who are going to watch this is, who wants to run for office? Who wants to replace us? Who wants to be those? Because, our leaders today, quite frankly, aren't doing justice to what their jobs truly entail. And I got involved to try to lead the charge to get, more younger people involved and kind of make it a trendy thing, and I think it has become a trendy thing because we've had to, wake up to this reality that we're all living in this world of politics. And that our representation is corrupted. There's tons of dark money, and there's tons of interests that don't reflect the best for all. And young people get that. They have a no bullshit meter that they're just installed with from a young age. Maybe it's technology that you've grown up with. Yeah. And having that kind of access to information. And I just challenge young people to step up to the plate. Get active. Take this into your own hands. Yeah. Get involved. This is for you, and everyone in power today is simply holding space to then pass it off to the next person in power. That's going to have that power.
Do you think people are afraid to challenge the status quo? Do you think they don't think, even when elected, they have a little voice compared to, people constantly, when I give this talk to my friends or stuff like that, because I do believe that a lot of my friends have mentalities that are beneficial to the community and could be great for outreach, but they point to people like Bernie Sanders, and they point to like individuals in Congress who have been doing it for years and not seen. I mean, Bernie Sanders has run for president how many times now?
Right.
And hasn't gotten anywhere close, no matter how powerful his social media presence is. I mean, a bird landed on his finger and a meme. He's the king of our culture.
But he you know, he's made huge, tremendous strides
100%.
in the system. And you got to take the small victories, and you got to celebrate them, and you got to see how it's going to build, and you got to just build upon the momentum. And I'd say we're on a great track, and Bernie's done us a huge service. And at the end of the day, we don't need Bernie. We need all of us, you know, like his last campaign slogan, not me, us, you know, and I really do believe in that message. And it really is about us, and us taking back the power that we rightfully deserve and have, and owning it, right? So I totally have faith in us overcoming the huge weights of corruption and overcoming the status quo. I think it takes a lot of political will, it takes a lot of energy. I can tell you firsthand at the local level, for the first 2 years of my time in office, I've been hitting my head against the wall like crazy, trying to figure out how to get through some of these barriers and shake things up that haven't been shaken in decades. And I can tell you, you know, I feel extremely successful on a huge range of fronts. The call I just got off before this meeting with you was on our zoning code. We're making adjustments to our zoning code that will impact every future student housing development and require them to build a certain percentage of 1 bedrooms and studios, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, and then a cap at 4 and above bedrooms.
Yeah.
And so making projects that are good for the community at large and not just students. That is huge.
Yeah.
And just one of many things I'm working on. But I'd say, you know, I've seen, you know, firsthand folks around me on council afraid to do what they believe and know to be right because of the pressures around us, you know, as elected officials. We walk a fine line, and there's a lot of pressure placed on us. So yes, it's one thing to be on the outside and have this idea. Once you're inside, to continue and push that idea is very difficult. Going back to what you're saying about, you know, Bernie and others in office. Yeah. But we can eventually get momentum, especially when, like we talked about with policing, there's that public critical mass in terms of like an idea. When that happens, mixed with some political will, it's a smooth path forward.
I think. So, oh, go ahead. Finish up.
I was just gonna say, and so we need people who are very strong, emotionally into their cores, that can like handle a lot of heat, a lot of pressure, a lot of outside, you know, influences trying to persuade you when it comes to being in positions of power, and also a balanced approach with an open heart. Right? We don't need, again, bridge burners. We need consensus builders. Yeah. But we also need people who are strong-willed and can push forward the agenda of meeting the needs of the people.
Yeah, I think there's a saying that I used to hear a lot when I played football, which was stand up, don't stand out, and then build up, don't build out. It's one of those things that you have to stand up for what you believe in, and people will follow. You don't want to stand out and be the only one speaking about a subject. You want to stand up, educate, and then build up your community, build up your environment, build up the individuals around you to eventually create a community, create change, create opportunity. And so I think that's what every question that I've asked you today kind of boils down to, is being able to hold on to the idea that you're not the only one in a sea of millions. You know, you have to think not only of yourself, but of the individual rights of others. And that builds a community with that awareness. I think that was one of your biggest things when you were running for office, is awareness, just being completely aware of your surroundings and your community.
And listening, right? Listening to other perspectives and points of view. You know, I've taken a lot of time to build my understanding of our police chief and the policing here in Flagstaff. You got to take time to listen. You know, to the things that you struggle most with, you got to listen first. And if you listen first, you'll understand. And if you understand, you're going to have respect and credibility in their eyes, and you can work together towards a solution. Because at the end of the day, I'd say All of us want more or less the same thing. It's just, how do we get there?
Yeah.
Like you said, how do we change the status quo?
Mm-hmm.
And you can either come at it with a heavy fist, or you can come at it with a more of a collaborative, empathetic approach.
Yeah, I think what people realize when they open themselves up to others' ideas and perspectives, and they listen and they gain mutual respect for one another, they realize that we're special as individuals, but we're not very different. We all have similar wants, desires, and needs, and those can be met by compromise, by building each other up and cooperating as a community. And so I think,
yeah.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, compromise doesn't mean any kind of abuse to yourself. Like,
Mm-hmm.
like there's some systemic issues that are abusive, and they've been going on for forever. And so, we don't need to compromise on some of these core things, but we can compromise in our approach. Maybe we want to defund the police today, but maybe the compromise is, okay, we're not going to defund the police, but we're going to work together towards an alternative solution, which might result years later as a defunding of the police, because we won't need the police as much.
Yeah.
But that kind of compromise, in terms of the strategy and how we get to that place united, is where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I think that's the core of the American ideal. To be completely frank, I think it's the idea of not necessarily compromising, but collaborating. I think that's a word that me and my girlfriend use a lot when discussing things in our own lives, is collaborate, don't compromise. We want to be able to do the best for each other, and in talking about the larger community, doing the best for one another, so that we can all have a generalist peace, a generalist hope for the future, and desire to drive change and evolution as not only Flagstaff residents, not only Arizonans, not only United States citizens, but inhabitants of the world.
Boom.
So I think that kind of boils down our entire communication for the day. Thank you again for taking the time to talk with me. I know you're very, very busy. I know that the pandemic is constantly at war with you. So I'm going to let you get back to your civic duty, and I'm going to try and do mine. Thank you again so much for being on the show.
Alex, thanks for having me, and thanks for getting the word out and all that you're doing.
I'm trying my best. Thank you.